Actually, when I read about karma, I read that it could be something that has something more to do with our internal state, meaning that if I am self-centered, if I'm egoistic, if all I do is think of myself, I will experience internal suffering. Whereas if I think of others and free myself of my self-centeredness, I will be free of that suffering. Is that closer to what you're saying?
I'm not really an expert in karma, and I was never engaged in Buddhism or any of its branches. I think that it's not exactly correct, because the wisdom of Kabbalah, it brings us the reforming light. It's a very special upper means that comes from outside of our world. It's a force that works on a person and raises him above his egoistic nature. And then a person transcends to a point where he doesn't need meditation, where he doesn't need to even perform any special corporeal actions. He doesn't need any special lifestyle. All these things happen inside of him, according to his intention. This is one thing. Another thing is that the main thing is that it's done by that so-called reforming light that doesn't simply make a big egoist into a small egoist. So much so that a person thinks that he's no longer inside the ego and he's willing to sit all day long and meditate. No, the wisdom of Kabbalah demands of a person to publicize the method, circulate it, to connect as many people as possible to it, to organize them, get them together, for him to connect all of mankind, and not that he can sit on his own, on some hilltop in a special posture, and think thoughts that are as disconnected as possible from this world. The wisdom of Kabbalah is very realistic and practical.
So it doesn't cancel a person's ego, but rather direct it correctly.
Furthermore, because the more we advance in the realization of the wisdom of Kabbalah, on the one hand, from the so-called left line, we become more egoistic, because anyone who's greater has greater desires. Meaning that if I know how to correct my small ego, then from the general system, I get a greater ego.
Kabbalah makes me more egoistic?
Yes, on the one hand. On the other hand, it gives me the tools to deal with this ego so that we can transcend it, rise above it, and this way we can correct the ego more and more. Therefore, whoever is engaged in the wisdom of Kabbalah doesn't feel that he's already in some kind of nirvana or something, in some exalted states that are disconnected from reality, but to the contrary. We enter deeper and deeper into the will to receive, deeper and deeper into the evil reality, and there we cause greater and greater corrections.
You mentioned earlier that everything happens within our intention. So what is more important here? The intention that we have behind an action or the action itself?
For us, the intention and the action are one and the same. There's no difference between the intention and the action. Because by the intentions, we operate reality. We don't have to do anything with our hands or legs, unless it's in order to organize people, for them to study together, and for them to come into closer contact with the wisdom of Kabbalah. But actually, probably like in these methods and these teachings, it's all about the inner realization. It also says so in our books that Abraham, our patriarch, he gave his students the method of the wisdom of Kabbalah in a certain form and sent them eastwards. Maybe it refers to all of those teachings that later were realized in India and so on.
All of these concepts that sound similar to what you're saying are actually coming from the same source?
Yes, I think so. Even in Japan and, well, China, it's a bit different. It's Confucius. and later it changed somewhat. But more or less, all of the Eastern methods, teachings, all the nations there, this is how they are. And to begin with, this is how it was also with Islam and Christianity. Only later on, it all went through certain changes. Also, Judaism went through many changes. But the basis for all of them is the wisdom of Kabbalah that only shows itself as the implementation of love another as thyself.